Welcome to What's Going On, the weekly podcast and videocast of First United Methodist Church in Yankton, South Dakota. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of What's Going On. I'm Pastor Katie here at First United Methodist, and I'm glad you could join me for this episode. Now, just to get the elephant out of the room, if you are watching this podcast, I am wearing the same shirt as I was in last episode, but I hope you can tell that my hair is different. And so this is a different week. This is a different podcast. I just happened to like this shirt and wore it 2 weeks in a row. Today on the podcast, this is going to be the final podcast for season 5 of What's Going On. Every year that we do this is a season. And those start in July. So I'll start the next season 6 of the podcast in August when I return from renewal leave. So there will not be a podcast starting next week through the end of July. Into August is when I'll come back with the podcast. And so I thought for this final episode of season 5, I want to talk a little bit about Dakotas Annual Conference because I am heading there next week. It is the final thing I do before renewal leave. So I want to talk a little bit about annual conference, especially about some of the legislation that is coming up this year for us to vote on, and some things that are happening. Also, just a quick plug, VBS is this weekend, so definitely want you to be a part of that. Make sure that you're bringing your kids and coming to worship Sunday, 10 a.m. at Memorial Park. So just again, a little plug for Vacation Bible School that we do with Trinity Lutheran and the UCC Church. So Dakotas Annual Conference, this is the annual meeting of all of the churches and clergy of the Dakotas Annual Conference. Every church is represented by delegates that are elected to that position in their local charge conference. I'm using very Methodist polity language. If this is something that's very confusing to you, I apologize. I will do my best to explain. Every year, churches have an annual meeting, basically, where we do the business of the church, including setting our budget for the year, salaries and things like that, as well as electing delegates to annual conference, which is kind of the next level up of our organizational structure. We have 3 lay delegates. Lay means non-clergy to annual conference that come from Yankton First United Methodist. They are Craig Sherman, Carla Hummel, and Bob Thuey. Bob Thuey also serves on our leadership team as a delegate to annual conference. His job is to relate issues that we are having at the local church to the conference level, and then also taking that information that he learns at conference back to the local church leadership team. That is one of his roles. Annual conference this year is going to be in Mitchell, South Dakota. So it will have both lay delegates and clergy delegates. Ideally, those numbers would be even, that there's an equal number of lay delegates to clergy delegates at annual conference, because in the United Methodist Church, lay voices and clergy voices are equal. So you're not going to have a bunch of pastors deciding things for the lay people of the church, nor the other way around, a bunch of lay people deciding things for the pastors of the church, that they have equal voice and vote on our legislative things. There are things that only pastors will vote on, things that lay members vote on. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. This year it's in Mitchell. It's the first time it's been in Mitchell since I've been in ministry. We'll be meeting at Dakota Wesleyan University, which is our United Methodist affiliated university here in South Dakota and in our conference. And so that'll be really nice. We'll be having our service of the Celebration of Life and Ministry service at Mitchell First, downtown Mitchell First, which is very special to me because that was actually my first appointment in ministry was at that church as the associate pastor. And so that'll be very fun to kind of have a full circle moment for me. And that'll be happening on June 8th. So annual conference serves a lot of purposes. Some of it is just gathering the people of the conference together. There's something special. We kind of call it holy conferencing when we are together in the same space, when we're worshiping together, when we're visiting, we're connecting, getting to know each other and getting to talk about things. And so that's really cool. And it's one of my favorite parts of annual conference. But we also then are hearing reports on the different agencies and ministries and committees and what we've all been doing together. And so we'll hear from the conference treasurer about budget because we'll need to vote on our conference budget while at annual conference. We're going to be hearing from different boards and agencies. So I serve on the Board of Ordained Ministry. We will have a report there. We have things like the common table, we have nominations. I mean, there's in a lot of ways it parallels things on the local church level. We have it also at the conference level. They have a board of trustees on the conference level. We'll hear from them. So there's a lot of like reporting happening of like and celebration of ministry. There's different awards that get awarded at annual conference. One of my favorites is the award for evangelism. That one's always a really fun one. Youth ministry has awards. That's really cool as well. So there's different, again, informational sessions. There is also business sessions. There's sessions where just the lay people will be together and talk about things that are relevant, and sessions where the clergy will be together to talk about and do things that are relevant just to the clergy. And then we also will have times of teaching. This year at annual conference, I mentioned it in my sermon, but Dr. Timothy Eberhardt will be the resident theologian, and he is going to do some of the teaching sessions and talking. His area is really in creation care, really in ethics around ecology. And so that will be really interesting and definitely in line with kind of some of the areas of interest in our own church and where we have some energy and some action, and like I said, that we are actually partnering with Dr. Eberhardt with this Midwest coalition thing that we're doing. So it's really exciting to have him here, and it feels like stars are sort of aligning in that way. So that's really fun. So, and that actually leads probably to one of the first pieces of legislation that is in our conference workbook. So the conference workbook is kind of where all the delegates get their information and includes the different pieces of legislation. So one of the legislation pieces that are coming before us for us to vote on is the formation of a conference green team and caretakers of God's creation coordinator. So just like our church created a green team, someone is pushing or putting forth legislation to have our conference, the Dakotas Conference, create a green team that can then help to enable other churches to start doing some of this work and creating their green team. So to really create a system of support for that. And this is coming again out of General Conference 2024, where legislation there was passed to do this kind of work. And so it is kind of taking what happened at General Conference and then going, how are we going to do this as the Dakotas Conference? And so the Marty Tepke Floyd, who's a pastor in North Dakota, is the one that is submitting this. And he has some people already in mind for who he would like and been talking to recruit for this green team. And when I was looking at one of his reports, I noticed a familiar name. Our very own Dan Johnson has been recruited, that if this conference green team resolution passes, that he would serve on that as well. So again, not only helping to steward our own church in what we do with the green team, but then again spreading that to other United Methodist churches in our conference. And so that's one of the pieces of legislation that is coming up for vote this year at annual conference. The second is a re-affiliation process. And so this is a policy that is being submitted for local churches seeking readmission to the United Methodist Church. I need to be clear that as far as I know, we haven't had any local churches that have requested this, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to have a plan in place. And so this is being submitted by the Board of Trustees, the Conference Board of Trustees, and the appointed cabinet. And I want to read what the rationale is for this. It says, with the spirit of grace, we welcome those churches which have disaffiliated or withdrawn to rejoin the United Methodist Church. Where applicable, every annual conference shall have a policy of reaffiliation for the churches seeking to return to the connection. Each such policy shall require that reaffiliating churches affirm their commitment to the trust clause in paragraph 2503 of the Book of Discipline. So let me again explain a little bit about what that trust clause is and who this is talking about. In the United Methodist Church, all of the property that churches have is actually held in a trust. We are not the owners of our property. The property is actually held in trust with the annual conference for our use, even though we're the ones that are paying for new roofs and things like that. And it is that way so that that this property is used for the ministry and purpose and mission of the United Methodist Church. Churches that disaffiliated left with their property, and they got to leave with their property in the Dakotas Conference for $1. They paid $1 for all of their property. And that was one of the concessions, I guess, with those disaffiliating. So what we're looking at are churches that chose to disaffiliate. Primarily, they were able to disaffiliate under a specific paragraph in the Book of Discipline, the prior Book of Discipline, that was created in the special conference in 2019 that allowed churches to leave over homosexuality. I think throughout the connection, there has been some rumblings of churches that voted to leave. And then people, I think, as humans are, want to not necessarily understand fully what their decisions are. Maybe you get told a certain thing, or you think this is what's going to happen, and then the reality, the light of day comes, and it's not what you thought it was. And so the United Methodist Church wants to show grace, and churches going, we made a mistake. This is not what we thought. Maybe, we didn't realize the good thing when we had it kind of situation. And so this is for churches to reaffiliate and to become United Methodists again, and in particular to understand the trust clause that was such a big hang-up for many churches when they were trying to leave. This, I want to be clear, is different than a clergy person who has disaffiliated. That is a different route, which would not be an easy route. Just as churches left the connection, clergy people who withdrew their membership also left a connection and broke vows in doing so. And so I just want to be very clear that with churches re-entering, it's not necessarily that they re-enter with the pastor who is serving them. I don't know if any of you went there or not, but I did, and I just wanted to share that. So I'm not going to go into the details of this one, mostly because I haven't read through all of it yet, but it looks like the process that you have to meet some certain eligibility requirements. You have to do discernment. The annual conference leadership is involved. There has to be approval in the local church level. The annual conference also would have to approve a church coming back in, and then caring for all of that. So it would not be like oh, you want to come back? Great, done. Like rubber stamp that. Yeah, you're good to go. It would be a process, just as leaving was a process. So that's another one. Next is conference structure and rules of order update, which sounds super interesting. Again, this is coming from our appointive cabinet. And basically, there's some of the staffing on the conference level is changing. And so they're switching languaging around that. And so I'm scrolling. The rationale, it says, in order to deepen our Wesleyan Methodist faith and identity and keep them before us in all that we do, it is updating some sections in our doctrinal heritage and history. and summaries from the corresponding paragraphs of the Book of Discipline, a description of how we live out our purpose as an annual conference, talking about what it means to be a viable local church, and then updates to job titles, descriptions, and processes. And so you can read through that. The part that I found interesting is, again, we have a different job description for Rebecca Treves, will be the assistant to the bishop for connection and communication, which is kind of one job title for what she's doing right now. Removing language around director of leadership development. We just haven't had one. And then it looks like they're also maybe going to be talking, instead of about district superintendents, conference superintendents. I think with the way that our conference is going, that we're going to use our superintendents a little bit differently, I think is the proposal. So that's what that one is about. And then we have our constitutional amendments, and this is a big one, and this is regionalization, and this comes from General Conference. And basically, again, I'm going to read from the document so that I'm not saying something that is inaccurate, but regionalization allows each region of the church to make decisions that will best support outreach and ministry efforts in their specific setting. So I'm going to pause for a second and just say that right now we have regionalization in the church in our central conferences, which are any conference that exists outside of the United States. They have the ability to adapt the Book of Discipline for their context and culture. And so again, it already exists in some capacity in our church. At General Conference, what they were saying is that the United States would then become a region as well. So I'm going to go back to reading. This ability is already in place in the central conferences. Why did I pause? It's already in there. Regionalization will bring that ability to the U.S. as well. Regionalization was developed collaboratively by United Methodists across the globe, and it was adopted by an overwhelming majority of General Conference delegates. 9 regional conferences will comprise the UMC, 1 in the US, and 8 across Africa, Europe, and the Philippines. So this next section I thought was really interesting and helpful. So what can't regional conferences do? So what is off the table? Not allowed. They cannot create their own constitution. They cannot adopt any policy in violation of the Constitution contained in the General Book of Discipline. So there's some things that make us who we are as United Methodists, and you can't mess with that. You cannot alter the doctrinal standards. You cannot alter our theological task. You cannot alter the ministry of all Christians or the social principles. These are things that are found at the beginning of the Book of Discipline. The doctrinal standards are what we use in the Board of Ordained Ministry when we are interviewing candidates. It is our standard for what we believe. These things cannot be changed region to region. So that's going to be across the board. That's what we share. So what are the things that regional conferences can do? They can draft and publish their own regional book of discipline, which are the pieces that can be adapted. They can do that as well with hymnals. And so obviously that makes sense when you think of the church in Africa, having their own hymnals that are in the languages and having songs that they would sing. Books of worship and other liturgical resources set requirements for ordination and licensed ministry with respect to their needs and resources. So I can talk a little bit about this. So what this means is right now we already have that, we have certain educational requirements and standards here that there is already kind of exceptions for when you look at I guess the districts or the regions that would be in Africa. And so the way that they handle those things and the training of those things are a bit different. And so it would be what kind of educational requirements are, do we expect, do we need? What do we need and expect? And so we already do this a little bit. There's some things about the Dakotas conference ordination process that's a little bit different than other conferences, like for one, we require a minimum of 3 years in provisional training. The Book of Discipline says it has to be a minimum of 2, and we say we actually want you in 3 for what we're trying to accomplish. And so it's going to be things like that to set standards for lay membership to the church. To again, these are things that you can see how they become contextual. Develop practices around marriage ceremonies, funerals, and other rites that align with cultural contexts and laws in each country. Reorganize their annual conferences, districts, and charge conferences to best serve their missional needs and convene their own judicial courts. This one I think is going to be really interesting. And we see this already a little bit coming through in the Dakotas with how we are going to handle superintendents, at least what is being proposed. And work with annual conferences to ensure policies and practices align with the laws in each country. I want to give an example that we have right here in the Dakotas Conference, and that is in North Dakota, clergy are mandatory reporters if there is a suspicion of abuse, neglect, things like that. In North Dakota, all of our clergy are mandatory reporters. They can be held liable if they know something and do not report it. That is not true in South Dakota. In South Dakota, clergy are ethically mandatory reporters, but we are not held accountable by the law in the same way. And so again, depending on where you live, how the law interacts with our practices. And so again, looking at things like that. So that is the regionalization part of the constitutional amendments. Ballot number 2 is the inclusiveness of the church at General Conference. They voted to remove language that prohibited homosexual Christians from marriage and ordination. And so this is kind of talking about the inclusivity of the church, that all people are of sacred worth and all persons without regard to race, gender, ability, color, national origin, all of that stuff gets to be United Methodist, which again, when we say all, we mean all. There's also a part in here about racial justice and clergy delegates. The clergy delegate, some of these are really, are they going to affect you as the average churchgoer? Probably not. This would be an example. What they are saying is that clergy delegates to the general conference, the change they want to make is that the educational requirement is that they have completed a master, rather than just an MDiv, that the Master of Divinity degree has come from a University Senate approved theological school, or its equivalent as recognized in a central conference, which again, you see that regionalization coming out. So they're just putting on a little bit more stringent requirements for clergy delegates going to general conference, in particular, that they want clergy delegates to annual conference who are steeped in United Methodist training. At least that's what I'm seeing. And then looking at budgets. So those are the things that we are going to be voting on this year at annual conference. And then there's the other big topic for this year is they are switching the clergy retirement plan to something called Compass. Again, does this affect the average churchgoer? In so much as part of what you give to the church, part of it goes to the clergy retirement plans. But does it affect clergy more than the lay people? Certainly, certainly. We're going to be spending some time learning more about it in our clergy session. Again, that would be a great example of something that would be super boring for the average layperson to sit through a presentation on clergy retirement plans if they're not clergy. So that's happening at clergy session so that the layperson doesn't have to sit through that. So I think that's a very good plan. So that is some of the topics of business that are happening at annual conference. And then I want to talk just a little bit about the celebration of life and ministry service. This is probably one of my top five favorite services of the year, and certainly my favorite service that I don't lead during the year. Um, it's like the only service I go to, not in the local church. But the annual conference is like my local church. It is where my membership is. My membership isn't in the local church, but in the annual conference. And so when I get to worship with my fellow clergy, it is worshiping in my church. And this service is a very special service. We get to celebrate life in ministry with our clergy colleagues who are retiring from ministry. And there are some really incredible pastors who are retiring this year, and it makes me a little bit sad. But I'm so happy for them as well. We are celebrating our clergy and people, clergy spouses and who have passed away in the last year. And again, we've had some really special people that have been staples in the conference for many years that have passed away this year. Rod Gist is one that comes to my mind. That annual conference will not feel the same without him there. But my favorite part is it is also the service where we commission and ordain, people for ministry. We also recognize local licensed pastors as well. But there is something very special about being commissioned to ministry as a provisional elder or deacon. I was an elder. I still am an elder. I remember my commissioning year. It was 2014. Annual conference was in Rapid City that year. My parents drove out to come to that service in particular. And during that service, the clergy who were retiring actually robed the clergy who were beginning their journey as provisional clergy. And so they put on they helped us put on clergy robes as a sign of, it was a beautiful thing of like passing the mantle almost, right? Like they are ending their time and they're passing on this mantle of like, you're taking on ministry now, and filling that space that is left behind. And I remember just coming away from that, and you have the bishop laying hands on you and praying over you, the whole cabinet. And it's just a really powerful moment. And it's like, this is really happening. And for me, when I was commissioned, I hadn't started serving a church yet. I went to annual conference and then moved after that to Mitchell. And I just remember like after that moment felt like this is real. Like I'm Pastor Katie now. And so really special. And then I probably told this story before, but I will tell it until I'm blue in the face. My ordination year was 2017. Again, if you might notice, that's 3 years because we require a 3-year period between provisional and ordination at minimum. So I did the minimum 3 years and completed all my requirements. And annual conference was in Bismarck, North Dakota that year. At that point, we were alternating between Bismarck and Sioux Falls. And I was like, of course, I'm getting ordained in Bismarck. And rather than Sioux Falls, it would have been so much more convenient for my family and everybody to come. But they still came, which was really beautiful and special. And ordination was at Legacy Church in Bismarck. And I was 7 months pregnant with Benjamin. I didn't know it was Benjamin yet, but I was very uncomfortable and very swollen. And it was so hot that week. And during the ordination service, again, the bishop lays hands on you. They place a stole on you. That's when you can wear stoles in the United Methodist Church, is at your ordination. It's a sign of ordination. And then the bishop also washes your feet, just like I do at our Monday, Thursday service. But you can imagine being 7 months pregnant, very swollen, and the shoes I wanted to wear, I couldn't wear because I couldn't even zip them up. And I had to somehow get my shoes off in order for the bishop to wash my feet. I couldn't even see my feet. And so again, really special memories there. That service also includes a time of basically like an altar call in a way, but instead of just coming forward committing to Jesus, it is for people who feel a call into ministry. And I remember when I did that as well. I mean, like I've been to so many of these services, but they're so pivotal in my life and ministry. That service I went to when I came forward was in Sioux Falls at First United Methodist Church in Sioux Falls. I had given my life, I had kind of said yes to this call to ministry the summer prior. And before heading off to seminary, I went to annual conference that year as a lay equalization delegate. And when they had that time, I came forward, and that was kind of a really beautiful moment of being prayed over by members of the Board of Ordained Ministry and clergy that would become my colleagues, and just this public display of God is calling me into something, and I'm saying yes. So I say that because at my ordination service, Uh, we've done our things. I got my stole, I got my shoes back on. Probably some people helped me with that. I don't really remember. And then they do the part where if you feel called to come down and we'll pray with you. At this point in my life, I was not one of the people who were up there praying. I since taken on one of those roles. But my husband went down jaw on floor. I kid you not. I was like, what is he doing? What does this mean? Do you want to be a pastor now? I love Jason with all my heart and soul. Today, as I'm recording this is our 9th wedding anniversary. This man is my ride or die. He's my best friend in the whole entire world. I am not convinced that he is called to be a pastor. And in that moment, I was like, I don't know what's happening right now. And of course, I'm like 7 months pregnant. I've got hormones all over, just like coursing through my body. And so I'm going forward. I'm like weeping, and I'm like, I don't even know what's happening. Like, are we going to be a clergy couple now? What's going on? Um, and what he said and explained in that moment, and I'm gonna tear up for real. That was his way of accepting the calling that God had for him, which wasn't a call into ministry as a pastor, but it was a call into ministry as the spouse of a pastor. That he was accepting his role to make my life in ministry possible. And you see that. You see him living that out week in and week out when he gets the kids ready and he brings them and he does that work. So many of you have commented on how an incredible father he is. And he is, but that is the role that he accepted that day. That is the calling that he recognized in the moment when he saw me be ordained, was God calling him into a particular role to make all of this possible. Can you tell how much that means to me? To have a partner like that and to have a moment like that? There's something incredible about this service. I've had many students I've known over the years who've come forward. I've gotten to walk with people. I've gotten to pray with people. It's really incredible. And so I hope that you're able to appreciate some of those things that we do at annual conference, and know that you're welcome to that service. It is open to the public. Anybody can come, and you can head to Mitchell downtown first. We'll be live streaming it as well. So, and then that's the last thing I do before my renewal leave starts. Again, I just want to say a huge thank you to the church, to the staff, to the leadership team for not only supporting this and making it possible and making sure things are covered, but really encouraging me to do what I need to care for myself, so that I can be the best leader and pastor for all of you, which is really my number one goal, is to take this time to make sure that I am in a good place, and have a little rest and tend to my own soul, so that when I return in August, we're ready and raring to go. So I appreciate not only the space and time to do that, but your respect of that boundary for me for this summer, that call the church for any needs that you have. We have people that are covering pretty much everything, like except for this podcast, because nobody wanted to sit in front of a computer and talk off the top of their head for half an hour. I'm not sure why, on behalf of the church. And then obviously I'm not going to be doing a summer Bible study like I normally do. Those things will all come back. So with that, I'm going to sign off for season 5. 5 years. This is my longest appointment in a church so far, and what a blessing it has been, and I hope continues to be for a long time to come. But I will see you in a couple of months, and until then, God bless. Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Going On, a video and audio podcast of First United Methodist Church in Yankton, South Dakota. We'd love to have you join us for worship on Sundays at 10 a.m., either in person or via our live stream, which can be found at our website, www.firstumcyankton.org, or by searching First UMC Yankton on YouTube.